Chapter 317. 1. This time, it's probably goodbye forever. Seeing the look of bewilderment on her face, the man raised an eyebrow slightly, looking like he just realized something before he smiled in understanding. In your body, a preventive spell of the Dark Night demons has been placed. It protects you by allowing you to withstand severe harm 3 times and not die. But the price one has to pay for this technique is high, as the harm inflicted on you will be deflected right onto the spellcaster himself. Hearing what the man just said, Qingyu was stunned for a moment. It seemed like she was suddenly recalling a particular scenario in her mind. She could not remember exactly which time it was, but there was once when she got injured, and the pallor of Lu Junyao's face turned a very ugly color. He had merely told her that she must always protect herself, and she must not put herself in any kind of danger, even if it was for his sake. She had smiled and agreed to it, but the expression on his face had been very serious as he looked at her, telling her that if she does not protect herself properly, she might just torment him to his death one fine day. She had not thought too much about it back at that time, and took it more as a sappy joke, finding those words a little corny, but thinking back on it now, for my sake, you have to remain safe and well. Otherwise, if you were to go on to the afterlife a step ahead of me, causing me to have no one to grow old together with, who am I going to cry out to then? Qingyu clenched up her fingers tightly, her eyes turning dark and deep. That fool. He has just inextricably bound his own life onto hers. Is he not aware of his own body's unique constitution? Bleeding from a small cut is already enough to make him suffer, and he dares to seek to take on any injury she suffers. When she sees him the next time, she will definitely teach him a good lesson. Seeing the myriad changes and expressions over the young lady's beautiful face, the man could not help but lift up the corners of his lips and say, "It looks like your relationship with this fellow man of mine is unusually close. But know that he is from the demon race. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He is that person I love, and that is all that matters." Qingyu interrupted, her voice flat and indifferent. The smile at the edges of the man's lips congealed slightly at that moment. It was only after a while that his voice came out, sounding a little hoarse as he said, "You're really just as stubborn as she is. So, are you going to help me or not?" Qingyu's eyes stared directly at the man as she asked. "At least do it for the sake that your fellow men from the same race as Lu Junyao." The man's eyes narrowed, and he was silent for a while before he opened his mouth to say, "It's not that I do not want to help you, but I am unable to. In order to have you resurrected, that person has committed many deeds that go against heaven. Don't you know that all things on earth follow the laws of karma and reincarnation? I think no one beside you will be able to stop her. Are you really going to just sit back and watch her continue to err?" Chapter 317. 2. This time, it's probably goodbye forever. Qingyu's brows were furrowed up, the look on her face questioning. The grip of the man's hand around his sword tightened. How could he not know that? Alas, there was nothing he could do. In reality, he was able to survive till now only because of that one half of his body that was from the god's race, and the special powers here in the bottom of this lake, which allowed his flesh body to slowly piece itself back and take form once again over the past million years. But the moment he leaves this place, the man's deep and unfathomable violet eyes washed over with a flash of complicated emotions for just a quick instant, and then quickly seemed to have made a decision, where his eyes grew deep and calm. It's all right. He has lived for such a long time already, and his heart just could not stop worrying for that one person. Just take it as, he will meet her for the very last time, and bring all of it to an end. At that same moment, with the scrying mirrors cracked and broken, the image on the screen at the other end became distorted and fuzzy, before finally turning a snowy white, where nothing could be seen at all. I've really underestimated these people. The woman's silver irises flashed with a strange glint as the corners of her lips stiffened, and a scorn showed on her face. "Sovereign, please accord punishment onto me." A heavy thump sounded behind her, accompanied by the cold, clear voice that carried a slight hoarse tinge. The woman turned her eyes around and saw Yanpa kneeling on the ground, her head hung low in silence. The woman's eyebrow arched up slightly. "What do you mean?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU hearing that, Yenpo's head sank even lower. I am to blame for being too careless, which allowed my traitorous disciple to release Qing Lanfei. I have already executed that traitorous disciple of mine, but Qing Lanfei is nowhere to be found. Ho ho, what a coincidence. The younger one has escaped, and so has the older one as well. Could this possibly be the will of heaven that their lives will not end here? The woman scoffed in laughter, and it was impossible to decipher her emotions from her innocuous-sounding voice. But it somehow sent a chill running up Yenpo's spine. Even though the person before her had always looked like a puerile young woman, Yenpo knew very well deep in her heart that the woman was a lot more unfathomable than her looks showed. No matter in terms of cultivation or in wisdom, she was overwhelmingly oppressive, completely undecipherable and impossible to read, making a person not dare to even breathe loudly before her. As haughty as Yenpo was, she bowed herself in subservience before this person, not daring to show any dissent. Chapter 317. 3. This time, it's probably goodbye forever. After a long moment of silence, the woman suddenly voiced out softly, "Where has Lianshi disappeared to?" It seemed as though it had already been several days since he last walked out from here, and there had been no sign of him again. In the past, he would always show up here every 3 to 5 days, even if he had no business here at all, forever cooking up an excuse to hide the fact that he merely wanted to come see her. His feelings towards her had not changed in the slightest even through that period of 1,000,000 years. But she had never wanted to face up to it before. As this person had always hung around before her all this time, for him to disappear all of a sudden, it somehow made her feel a little unused to it. But that's all there was to it. A habit she had grown accustomed to, seemingly never expecting the woman to ask about that. Yenpo was taken aback for a moment before she went on to reply. "I did bump into the Lotus Supreme Lord a few days ago, and he mentioned that he needed to make amends for his mistakes." Make amends for his mistakes? The woman's gaze constricted for a moment, but she did not say a word. Just what is he going to do? The bottom of the lake. Qingyu had thought that it would take a bout of convincing to talk this man around. Never had she thought that the man would agree to it so easily. Then, how are we going to get out from here? Qingyu raised her head up slightly to look at the towering man and ask. This person was really just too tall. At a glance, he was at least 2 meters tall. It was little wonder his demonic form had been so massive, as majestic as a lofty mountain. Hearing her question, the man did not respond but just slipped the sword back into its sheath with a swish, before planting the scabbard heavily into the ground at his feet. In the next instant, Qingyu felt the ground tremble and shake. Fortunately, Zhang Mai was quick and nimble enough to hold on to her, which allowed her to keep her balance and not fall. The water in the lake then surged and churned violently, before they split and parted to the sides, opening up a path for them to go forward. "Let's go," the man opened his mouth to say, and then went on walking ahead on his own, while Qingyu hurried to catch up with the man. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU should I address you as Lianshi? The man had a rather icy personality, and probably did not like to talk all that much. The fact that he had said so many words to her just now was already a miracle by itself. Realizing that, Qingyu took the initiative to speak up. "Ho ho, Lianshi was indeed once my name, but I don't think it belongs to me anymore." The man laughed softly as he spoke, but it seemed like there was a sliver of bitterness in that smile. Seeing that the man seemed to be feeling a little down, Qingyu could not help but to open her mouth and say, "But I really think that the person who assumed your name and continued to live would be suffering more than you. After all, he had never lived for his own sake, but only as your substitute." Chapter 317. For, this time, it's probably goodbye forever. You think that I am more fortunate? The man's gaze turned towards her, the corners of his lips curved up. Even if he is just a substitute, he is still at Mingyu's side, accompanying her over the past 1,000,000 years. To him, that is happiness. Qingyu was at a loss for words. Indeed, looking at it from another angle, death was not the most terrifying, but being forced apart was. And was it not true that the other Lianshi had been happy? No matter what his identity was, At least he had been alive. And he had been by the side of the person he loved for so many long years. But there was one thing that Qingyu was unable to fathom. Since you are still alive, why have you not gone to see her over so many years? How come no one ever knew that you still lived? And are you really that generous-hearted, that you would give your own heart to save your love rival? Qingyu's head looked up at the man, her face curious and inquisitive. The man's face looked a little resigned, and towards that chatterbox of a young lady. He was miraculously not feeling the slightest bit of disgust towards her at all. Probably, it was because her eyes looked clear and clean, its purity untainted by worldly desires, feeling exactly like when Mingyu had first appeared before his eyes all those years back in the faraway past. He just could not help himself, but to open his mouth and answer her query. I am naturally not that big-hearted. He lowered his eyes and let out a soft sigh. I had no choice back then as I was already injured after falling for the god's devious scheme, and I had to shield Mingyu from her father's mighty strike on top of that, which wrecked my body completely and left it in tatters. My consciousness was becoming weak and frail, and as I possessed both the blood of the god and demon race in my body, the two opposing forces battled fiercely for supremacy and control, and would have torn me into two if neither side came out triumphant. So you chose to put your own heart into the body of the other Lien Shi and revive him, thinking that he can forever protect Mingyu in your place, when you were not certain whether you would be able to survive in the first place. The words that the man left unspoken were finished on his behalf by Qingyu aloud. The man's eyes flashed with a glint, and his lips then curved up with a smile. You're quite a clever one. You're very smart yourself as well, Qingyu said as she winked and then smiled slyly to say. By doing that, not only did you make that fella owe you greatly, you've also made Mingyu remember you forever. Two birds with one stone. You've executed your plan really perfectly, haven't you? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The man's expression looked surprised for a moment before he laughed scornfully. You're a little one who overthinks things too much. That has never been my intention, as my actions were carried out of pure instinct in that highly critical moment. He paused for a moment, and then opened his mouth to continue. Although, there is one point that you've guessed wrongly. What? Qingyu arched up an eyebrow. This me, who is standing here right before you now, cannot in the true meaning of the word be considered to be truly alive. The man looked at her and said. Qingyu looked a little taken aback before she asked in puzzlement. What does that mean? Chapter 318. 1. Seeing the light of day once more. What does being not truly alive mean? The man curved up the edges of his lips and said in an indifferent tone. Back then, I had truly and really died, where I did not even possess a whole and complete soul. This me you see before you now is merely just a remnant shadow that gathered and formed together over the span of 1,000,000 years. Hearing that, Qingyu's face looked a little stunned, like she was finding that rather hard to believe. She suddenly stretched her hand out, like she wanted to go touch him and see. The man just stood there with a nonchalant smile hanging from the corners of his lips, making neither an attempt to avoid or dodge from her actions. However, in the very next instant, Qingyu saw her outstretched hand slipping right through the man's body. How? Qingyu stared at her hand in flabbergasted amazement before her brows knitted up and she said, But that little fella there had clearly tugged at your sword just now. Is your sword real then? The man smiled, but did not say anything as he brought the sword in his hand up before the young lady, indicating that she should try to give it a pull herself. Qingyu reached her hand out. Just as expected, her hand grasped nothing but air. Immediately, her eyes turned to cast a dubious-looking gaze upon the little toddler behind her. Although that little fella had lived for more than 10,000 years, everything he saw felt fresh and new to him, his sparkling big round eyes looking inquisitively here and there, seeming to find this world at the bottom of the lake exceptionally amazing. It seemed he could feel Qingyu's measuring gaze on him, as he turned his head around and flashed a grin at her, looking so innocent and guileless. How did he then? Qingyu could not help feeling a little puzzled. How was the little one able to pull out his sword and to touch his body? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It looked like he could sense her puzzlement as the man started to explain. It is because the little one is the same as me, in human form but without a solid body. Moreover, the earth fire devil vine is a demonic species, so we share a subtle link in a way, which made it possible for him to be able to touch me as well. The man had actually seen through the little toddler, and knew his true form all this time. The man's eyes then turned over to the other side, to rest upon the calm and quiet figure of the golden-haired youth, a glint of interest shining in his eyes. However, with this kid here, I am just able to sense that he isn't human. It is rather strange to me that I am unable to see his true form. Hearing the man mention him, Zhongmai could not help but raise his head up, his long slanted gold and silver irises flashing with a dark glint for a brief instant, before disappearing very quickly. He is my weapon spirit, a close companion who grew up with me. It is only normal that you are unable to see his real form, because he is an extremely rare spirit beast type weapon spirit. Chapter 318. 2. Seeing the light of day once more, Qing Yu lifted the edges of her lips, and opened her mouth to say with a smile, "Spirit beast type weapon spirit?" The man's face that had been highly nonchalant all this time, then seemed to finally carry a tinge of surprise. He looked at the youth once more and Zhong Mai's eyes coincidentally swung towards the man's way as well, his gold and silver irises coming to meet the gaze of the pair of violet eyes directly. What a pair of spectacular and unique-looking eyes. His true form. The man was still trying to make a guess when he saw a sliver of light flash in those strange-colored eyes, before the irises suddenly became sinister slits. Snake tribe. The man opened his mouth to say in that instant, "I am not just any ordinary member of the snake tribe," Zhong Mai said in a low voice that sounded a little cold, as if he did not really like his privacy being probed and invaded in such a blatant manner. The man laughed and turned his eyes away from the youth. They did not speak anymore after that. As the path ahead at the bottom of the lake gradually grew shorter, the light's refraction above their heads slowly became blinding to their eyes. Qing Yu's eyes squinted as she looked up above. Are they about to get out from this place? In the end, it was shown that she had been correct. The man's body came out from the waters first. Having stayed in those cold dark waters at the bottom of the lake for such a long time, he felt a little unused to it in the first instant. He came into contact with the highly intense light and air above, making his head spin with dizziness and his sight to blur. It took him quite a while to slowly recover from it. He could not help but put on a helpless smile at the corners of his lips as he lowered his head to stare at his own two hands, which seemed to grow a little more translucent for an instant. Looks like he really did not have all that much time left. On the other side, just as Qing Yu was coming out from the lake, Meatball's highly sensitive ears pricked up as it suddenly turned its little nose into a certain direction to sniff at the air, before its tiny face then shone with joy and delight. Its mother's scent. It cried out ecstatically. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. What? Qing Bei, who was carrying the little beast, heard those words first, and he could not help but to exclaim in surprise. Meatball blinked its eyes and turned to look at the youth. Its mother. I can smell her scent. Really? Are you certain it's Qing Yu? Although he possessed great sensory powers, but compared to the dark phantasm cat's inborn sharp sense of smell, his powers were naturally still a tad inferior, so he could not help asking for verification in an anxious voice. Hearing Qing Bei's question, Meatball inadvertently rolled its eyes, feeling rather miffed that the youth actually dared to doubt it, but the little beast still obediently answered the youth, to give him the reaffirmation he sought. Chapter 318. 3. Seeing the light of day once more, Mother's scent has just appeared. There is no way I am mistaken. Moreover, it seems that she isn't very far away from us. Meatball reiterated firmly. Lu Junyao opened his mouth and his low voice sounded. Are you able to pinpoint her precise location? Of course. That will not be a problem. Meatball nodded its little head, looking highly confident. As long as Mother is within the range of my nose, I will be able to find her. Upon saying that, Meatball leapt down from Qing Bei's arms. After closing its eyes for a short moment, it then opened them again. Its large azure eyes had changed into color and were sparkling with a silver light. It looked like it was trying to determine the correct direction to take, as its tiny body paused in its spot for a moment, before it went walking away confidently. Everyone immediately followed suit right behind. After all they had gone through on this journey, where they just barely managed to escape the clutches of death, everyone had lost the desire to compete with each other, becoming collectively cohesive and working together, as the most important thing at that moment was to remain alive. And Meatball had saved them from danger several times, gaining the trust of everyone, and making them think that they would not go wrong following that tiny little spirit beast. For these people to have discovered Qing Yu's traces, it was only natural that people from the mine-free peak were not excluded. She has appeared, Sovereign. The little one has revealed herself. The moment Yanpa discovered that, she immediately reported it to the woman in the Grand Hall, seemingly trying to make amends for her prior mistake. However, the news did not change the expression on the woman's face at all, making it seem as though that was completely within her expectations. Only she herself knew what she was thinking in her mind right at that moment. Lian Shi was nowhere to be found, and it was not known where he went. Could he really have steeled his heart and decided to leave her? Seeing the woman's calm and unperturbed demeanor on her face, Yanpa found it impossible to read her mood. But as she was still eager to make up for her prior mistake, she could not help but to open her mouth and ask, Sovereign, should I go have her brought back here? Or I fear that something unexpected might occur. Just do as you deem fit. Mingyu could not really be bothered with her, and just tossed those words out indifferently. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You hearing that? Yanpa bent her back slightly in a bow and said, Your subordinate understands. Immediately after that, Yanpa retreated her way slowly out from the Grand Hall, and then turned around to leave hastily. This was a chance that Sovereign had given her to make amends, so she was not about to disappoint Sovereign again. Lian Shi's heart that had laid silent for tens of thousand years, had for some unknown reason started to beat furiously once more. It was a feeling he had never felt before, which caused him to lower his eyes slightly to look down. Chapter 318. 4. Seeing the light of day once more, a hand came to rest on his chest where his heart is, but there was nothing he could do to calm the heart down. The heart seemed to be highly excited, as if something that happened was causing it to become maniacally ecstatic. What is happening to him? Why is he suddenly feeling so uneasy? This heart had given him a new lease of life back then, and he had come to gain greater strength and power from then on, together with the immortality he had sought for the longest time. Other than that, there had been nothing else. This heart inside him did not even beat like a normal person should, but just sat embedded in his chest coldly, not moving in the slightest. For it to thump so strongly like this was something that had never happened before. He knew that the heart did not belong to him at all, but to another person. Even though he had gained strong and mighty powers, he was still not the real owner of the heart after all. So besides having prolonged his life, the heart had never done anything else. But now what is happening to him? Why is there such a strong reaction? Is something going to happen? And it must be something that's related to that man. This is his heart, and this must be something about him. But he had seen with his own eyes the man dissipating into dust before scattering into the wind. Not even his soul existed anymore. So there is no chance that he could possibly come back to life again. But if he had not come back to life, then why is his heart beating so furiously? Lian Shi clutched his hand tightly against his chest, and clenched his jaws together as his footsteps took him resolutely off into a particular direction. It's this way. Even though he could not really believe it himself, his heart was however seemingly probing him towards this direction. There he will find that answer he sought. Have you ever been to this place before? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qing Yu looked at the stoically silent man and asked. I heard from the other Lian Shi that this was a place that was once inhabited by people from the gods' race. So many parts of it is kept looking the same, as it was from a long time back, where even the celestial energy in the air is still just as thick and robust. The man grunted in response. This is where the borders of the realms between the gods and demon races met, with the two races each inhabiting one half. The two races had always vied for control over the entire land, which only ended in heavy losses on both sides, with neither coming out the winner. Finally, a negotiation was called, and it was agreed that this place would be set as the central dividing line. Qingyu arched up an eyebrow in surprise. Ah, such a thing actually occurred. He didn't tell you that, the man said with a smile. Maybe it's just a small and unimportant detail, so he didn't see the need to bring it up to you. Qingyu's eyes flashed with a glint, the expression on her face seemingly a little complex. She hesitated for a brief instant, before she then opened her mouth to say, "Actually, I wanted to ask you this. Since you've come back, are you going to take back the heart that you've put in his body? Will he then die?" Chapter 319. Two Souls, You're Thinking Too Much Into It. The man let out a soft laugh before he said, "Since that heart has been given to him, then it belongs to him now. There is no use for me to go take it back from him." He lowered his eyes to glance at his hands, and they seemed to look a little more vague and faint than before. His lips could not help stiffening slightly as he went on to say self-mockingly, "For someone who does not even have a flesh body shell, it wouldn't matter that much whether he has a heart or not." Those words sounded highly defeatist, like he was giving up on himself. Qingyu was just about to open his mouth to say something when he saw the man's footsteps suddenly come to a halt. She raised her eyes puzzledly. "Why?" Her voice suddenly trailed off. Not too far ahead in the distance was a man standing there quietly. This place they had come to looked as if they were now in a different dimension from the route they had taken so far. It was not known when snow had started to fall from the sky, to land all over their hair and clothes. But as Qingyu was wearing all white clothes, the snow that fell on her wasn't that obvious to see. And the tall shadowy figure in front was clad in all black, strikingly visible against the white snowy ground. The wide and loose hem of those clothes flapped noisily under the gusty chill wind, his dark black hair and clothes making him look cold and forbidding. For a brief instant, the figure seemed to feel somewhat familiar. The man seemed to have spotted them as well, and the figure started to move towards them, his feet bringing him closer with every step. As the man came closer, Qingyu could then see the man's countenance clearly, and recognized the man to be Lian Shi. But the man was someone who was always seen to be genteel, clad in elegant green or untainted white, always looking every inch a modest gentleman, clean and refreshing as a spring breeze. This was the first time seeing him dressed in stoic and stern black clothes like this, looking so mysterious and unfathomable, his presence grim and imposing. And the closer he came, the more unusual Qingyu found him to be. Back then, because he was telling her about the things that had happened to him in the past, he had come to reveal his violet irises before her. But that had been for just a brief moment, before his eyes quickly reverted back to their original black shade. However, right at that moment, his eyes had remained violet throughout, the color captivatingly deep and intense, his body exuding a devilishly evil aura. His originally fair complexion had become more pale, almost an unhealthy shade of white, looking like someone from the vampiric race who shunned from sunlight all their lives. Qingyu's eyes widened in surprise. How did he become like this? It looks like my reappearance has affected him in some way. The man beside her seemed to realize something. His violet eyes narrowed as his voice sounded somberly. Qingyu turned to look at him, but that one glance caused her to be stunned in place for a moment, like she had just discovered something strange. The countenance of the two men, actually, looked exactly alike. The clothes the two of them wore were complete opposites, one in black and one in white, as if they were two personalities at two opposing extremes, vessels that stood for kindness against evil, the highly differing auras emitting from their bodies striking the clearest and most conspicuous contrast. In the end, the evil black-clothed Lian Shi slowly came to stand right before them. "It's been quite a long time," he said softly, and one could even hear that his voice carried a nefarious tinge. Those deep and devilishly alluring violet eyes were highly nonchalant as they flitted lightly over Qingyu, which caused her gaze to constrict sharply as she felt strangely creeped out for an instant. "It has indeed been a long time." That gentle-sounding voice had come out from the mouth of the man beside Qingyu, It was as if the two men had exchanged their souls into each other's body. Qingyu was a little dumbfounded watching from the side, unable to react at that moment, not fully comprehending the situation before her eyes. You do not seem to be surprised to see me, the gentle white-clothed Lian Shi said with an almost indistinguishably faint smile at the corners of his lips, his voice slow and soft as it sounded. The black-clothed Lian Shi scoffed disdainfully and then said, "Your heart is still here. How could you be dead?" That was not a question, but an affirmative statement. Back when the guy had revived him with this demonic heart, he had already known it. But he had never thought that a whole million years would pass just like that. It had been so long that he had almost forgotten about the entire matter. The heart in his body belonged to this man before him, the person who was the mightiest of the demon race. The demonic heart of the child of the devil was naturally unlike any ordinary heart. It possessed its own consciousness and was able to recognize its owner. Hence, it was naturally able to sense that its real owner had returned and was reacting so strongly. For you to have come, you must have come to a decision on something. I would think that it is time that this heart is returned back to you. The black-clothed Lian Shi's face was cold and expressionless, his voice pausing at every word. Even though I have lived for so many years using your heart, I am, however, not thankful to you for that. Who let him decide whether he was to live or die? If he had not been resurrected back then, the outcome would have been different, and the person who would be remembered forever would have been him. Things would not be what it is now, with her being so estranged from him, his heart dead as settled ash. Neither do I need any gratitude from you, white-clothed Lian Shi said with a soft laugh, and then looked at him to continue to say, "But I had not thought that my reappearance would affect you so greatly." It was clear to see that his looks at that moment was exactly how the original Lian Shi had looked so many years back then, the mightiest and most powerful entity among the demon race. The demonic heart had not only altered the black-clothed Lian Shi's body constitution, it had also changed the man's looks and demeanor to become like its original owner. It is enough for me that you were able to accompany Mingyu by her side all this time. My reappearance here would not change anything at all. The white-clothed Lian Shi said in a soft voice. Tisk. A sliver of scorn came onto a corner of the black-clothed Lian Shi's face. Accompany Mingyu by her side? His hand slowly rose up to touch his own face. Even though I have come to look exactly like you, I am not even able to become your substitute in her heart. I have been the one who remained by her side for the past million years, but that vague and blurry shadow of you still cannot be wiped away from her heart. Since you have now returned, then let everything end already. After so many long years, it is time that she wake up from that dream. Hearing those words, the white-clothed Lian Shi seemed a little surprised. You were not like this in the past. From what I know, even though you were merely just a human, you were highly tenacious and strong, but you have now lost your self-confidence. What am I like in your eyes? The black-clothed Lian Shi laughed out loud, but there was so much bitterness in that laughter. Someone who only knew how to follow Mingyu wherever she went. A foolish kid who was thoroughly being used, but would still ignorantly jump right into it time and time again. In the next instant, the man's highly negative emotions then shifted quickly, the evil smile curling up on his face once again. I've had enough of this. I do not want to see this face that looks the same as yours. I do not want to see her staring in mesmerization at this damned face of yours all the time anymore. So just let this heart be returned to its original owner. He had not done that himself, because only the real owner of the demonic heart knew how to extract it out from one's body. And there was nothing he could do. Hearing that, the white-robed Lian Shi let out a soft sigh. Do you really need to do that? She merely has not realized what her own heart truly feels. The day will come where she will understand that you are the person who suits her the best. But you have returned, haven't you? Do you really think that I still stand a chance of getting her to even glance at me with you around? I have not returned, but have only come here to fulfill a person's request. Once I am done with the deed, I would not be here anymore. The white-clothed Lian Shi said slowly, as he looked at the man. Fulfill a person's request? The black-clothed Lian Shi subconsciously turned to look at Qingyu, seemingly a little taken by surprise. This young lady was actually able to convince the man to help her? As to what the request was, he didn't really need to guess to know what it entailed. Let's not waste any more time, and just bring me to go see Mingyu, will you? The longer we drag this, the bigger the change in you will be, and you might very well just fall into devilry. The white-clothed Lian Shi said as he shook his head helplessly. It took so much for you to achieve an immortal body in your path of cultivation. Do not let all of that end up to be for nothing. The black-clothed Lian Shi was silent for a while, seemingly considering the truthfulness behind those words. A short moment later he finally agreed. But before any of them did anything, they heard a woman's icy menacing voice reverberate around them. I've finally found you, my little one. To think that you were able to escape. I have really underestimated you. Xingyu froze in place, her body tensing up warily as she turned her gaze towards the source of the voice. Upon the wide expanse of snowy grounds, a group of people have suddenly appeared, all of them women. The woman in the lead was extremely beautiful with an exquisite countenance, cold and alluring. But the expression on that face was glacial and chilly, like ice that would never melt over thousands of years, feeling like it could freeze a person solid just by looking at it. Yenpa, the black-clothed Lian Shi's brows knitted up slightly, like he had not expected that she would find them all the way out here. Lotus Supreme Godly King, I am surprised that I would find you here with the little one here. It makes me wonder whether you are here to help her escape, or do we share the same objective, and you are here to bring her back. The edges of Yenpo's lips were stiff and grim, as she said those words in a tone that felt neither warm nor cold. Those words seemed to be accusing him of having intentionally released Qingyu from captivity, and was now secretly helping the young lady run away. Black-clothed Lian Shi's face turned even darker in an instant, a menacing aura flaring up around him, an invisible force that could unknowingly take a person's life. Yenpa had naturally sensed the change that came over the man, and she could not help but feel startled deep inside. How did this man's aura grow to become so evil and tyrannical? And with those startlingly intense violet eyes against his demonically pale countenance, he looked just like a terrifying devil. Has Lian Shi fallen into devilry? However, Yenpo's gaze had only been looking at him. It was only when the white-clothed Lian Shi turned his body around that the woman's eyes flared wide with pure and utter shock, with everyone behind her showing the same stunned expression on their faces. To suddenly see two different people's faces looking exactly alike, anyone would come to be shocked. What is going on here? How could there be two Lian Shi? Is this some kind of illusory technique? Who is the real Lian Shi here? Yenpo's eyes were chilly, her gaze swiveling over the two figures, one clad in black and one in white, her voice quivering hesitantly, filled with surprise and doubt. What can you tell? White-clothed Lian Shi said with a soft laugh. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU clearly, he was giving Yenpa the feeling he was more like the Lian Shi she knew. And Lian Shi was always seen to be genteel, and even tempered before everyone all the time. And she had never seen Lian Shi when his dark side surfaced before. Moreover, he had always been someone who was unfathomable and impossible to read. Hence, Yenpo was a little mystified at that moment. She had come all the way out here to capture the little lass who escaped, but was caught in such a tough predicament. Chapter 320. 1. Long-awaited embrace. Yenpo's gaze turned sharp. I do not care what you might be up to here. Sovereign has ordered for me to bring the lass back, and I don't think that you would not stop me from doing that, would you? What you want to do does not concern me, the black-clothed Lian Shi said coldly. Qingyu raised an eyebrow, and before she had even opened her mouth, she saw the white-clothed man beside her shift his body slightly to hide her behind him, as he looked at Yenpa to say in a soft voice, You are not in a position to stick your nose into the little one's affairs. I do not think that you want to see me draw my sword. Qingyu was a little surprised to see the man's actions, that clearly showed he was protecting her. She could not understand why he was helping her like this. It was said that the man was the mightiest entity among the demon race, and even though he was now incomplete, merely a remnant shadow of his former self, his powers were still not to be underestimated. Her gaze involuntarily drifted towards the sword grasped in the man's hand. It seemed like that sword had not left the man's grasp from the moment he appeared. Back when they were at the bottom of the lake, it had nearly been pulled out of its sheath by the mischievous little toddler, but the man had quickly pushed it back, seemingly very careful with that sword. What could be so special about it? Faced with one in black and one in white, two Lianshi before her, putting Qingyu's attitude aside, one of the Lianshi was dead set on going against her. Yanpa could not help feeling a little enraged, and that cold and impassive face finally cracked. She clenched her teeth tightly together and said, Lianshi, just what are you really playing at? I am exactly inclined to play games with you. Don't think just because you are favored by sovereign, and that gives you free rein to do as you please without paying any heed to others. If you do not want to end up being punished by sovereign, then capture that little lass and bring her back right now. The black-clothed Lianshi had originally not wanted to stick his nose into the matter, but with the return of the real Lianshi, the demonic heart in his body was undergoing a series of changes, which warped and distorted his personality, making him become unruly and bloodthirsty. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yanpa words rang in his ears. To him, it was an unveiled threat and blatant challenge to him, her tone making him feel like she was ordering him about. That quickly riled up his emotions, and his violet eyes turned sharp in an instant, seemingly stained with a blood-red tinge. The corners of his lips lifted up in a wide curl, to reveal 2 rows of sinisterly white teeth, a terrifying and frightful sight. His voice came out soft and slow, like he was biting on every single word. The thing I hate the most is when people talk to me with that kind of a tone. TSK. He is no longer the same weak and defenseless useless piece of trash that anyone can wantonly trample upon from before. Chapter 320. 2. Long-awaited embrace. The body of the man clad in all black seemed to be engulfed in an evil menacing aura straight out of hell, striking inexplicable fear into people who saw it. Yanpo's heart constricted and she berated. Have you lost your mind? You would dare to strike me? It would be a lie to say she was not frightened, because she knew deep down inside that she would not be Lianshi's match, and it was impossible to measure the man's depth and cultivation. But everyone throughout the entire Mind-Free Peak knew that this man was a person not to be trifled with. And even Sovereign herself was careful with the guy. Under that genteel shell was a hidden ferocious beast that had laid dormant for a very long time, but was ready to pounce whenever the opportunity arose. Seeing the expression on the woman that betrayed the fear she was feeling inside, black-clothed Lianshi laughed scoffingly, his gaze fixed unblinkingly upon the woman as he said, So what if I do? The instant his voice fell, he did not even give Yanpa the chance to take another breath. His voluminous black clothes billowed out as he shot forward at great speed, hurtling over the white blinding snow, like a black demon who suddenly sprouted wings on its back. What happened to him? The expression on Qingyu's face was a little surprised. Why has that man suddenly turned to become hostile against the enemy? Just a moment ago, hadn't he acted like it did not concern him whether she was to live or die? But now, is he standing up for her instead? She was not about to be so full of herself to think he was doing it because of her. It would seem like that woman's words just now had agitated him in some way instead. Seeing that, the white-clothed Lianshi, however, just laughed softly, and then said in a slowly voice, That man, back when he was still a human, had very strong pride and self-esteem. Despite his weak powers, his personality was obstinate, unyielding like a rock, and was extremely vengeful. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Speaking up till that point, his voice then paused for a moment before he turned towards the panic-stricken Yanpa and curved his lips up to say, That woman must have some kind of a feud with him before, and he had wanted to strike at her for a very long time. But it looked like he had no intentions of helping me at all just now. Qingyu's hand involuntarily came up to rub at her chin thoughtfully, trying to make sense of the situation. Moreover, isn't that woman on the same side as him? Is he really thinking of betraying Mingyu? I don't think he is thinking that much into it. You see, the white-clothed Lianshi said, as he cast a thoughtful glance towards the two people battling. I fear the demonic heart in him would have mutated even more, and even if he wanted to hold himself back, it has become something impossible for him to do. Mutated. The heart in his body was once originally one with me, but exists now in another person's body. As both of us have appeared at the same time, that demonic heart which originally belonged to me is spiraling out of control, and a mere human body will not be able to contain it, which is why it is affecting him like this. Chapter 320. 3. Long-awaited embrace. The white-clothed Lianshi explained slowly to Qingyu. Qingyu nodded in understanding, and then asked the man, "What will he finally turn to become in the end?" The white-clothed Lianshi was silent for a moment before he said, "He will fall into devilry and turn into a demon of the lowest kind, who only seeks blood and raw flesh, a demon who does not even possess an ounce of intellect. The kind that once they come out into the light, they would be mercilessly hunted down. So if the heart is taken away from him, wouldn't he then not have to turn into a demon? Ah, you forget that he is only able to still live because of the heart. Once that heart was taken away, he would undoubtedly die." Over on the other side, Yanpo was desperately trying to dodge from the demonic-looking black-clothed Lianshi. Already not a match for the man in the first place, and faced with this mindless person who knew nothing but to kill at that moment, Yanpo could do nothing but to do everything she could to defend herself. The aura coming out from his body was really just too frightening, which caused everyone that Yanpo brought with her to unconsciously back off, and not a single one among them dared to step forward to help her. Yanpo could not help getting flustered as she screamed out in a panic, "You entire piece of worthless thrash! Quickly come cover me to let me leave!" When those words came out, the whole group of people shrank away even further from her. "How dare you defy my orders?" Yanpo's eyes turned red from anger. One of them hesitated for an instant, and then opened her mouth to say slowly, "You yourself are already not a match for Lord Lianshi, so how could we possibly be able to do anything against him? We will just be sending ourselves to our own deaths, and moreover, this is a personal grudge between yourselves, so it is not our place to interfere." Upon saying that, those people did not even cast their glance Qingyu's way, before they disappeared in a whirl. Qingyu stood there staring with wide-eyed amazement, dumbfounded. What just happened? Have they just abandoned that woman and left? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The white-clothed Lianshi could not help but to laugh out loud. It would seem like this woman did not treat them very well. Yanpo was struck successively by Lianshi a few times, and even her defensive barrier had been shattered by the man. Her hand clutched weakly at her chest as she fell back a few steps in agony. However, the man did not look like he had any intention of stopping, as he continued on pressingly. Yanpo vomited out a mouthful of blood and screamed out anxiously, "Lianshi, it's your job to bring her back, and not come attack me like a rabid dog like this." "Rabid dog, you say?" Lianshi's lips split into a wide smile, his voice a sinister cackle. "If that is the case, why would you try to reason with a rabid dog?" Upon saying that, another palm strike struck Yanpo viciously on her body. Immediately, the woman's body flew back like a kite with a broken string, sliding over a great distance across the snow. Chapter 320. 4. Long-awaited embrace. Qing, you could almost feel the pain watching the woman. Were they fighting among themselves here? Just as she stood there with her brows knitted up, and was about to suggest to the man beside her to leave this place, a shrill young and puerile voice suddenly rang out crisply through the air a short distance away, ecstatic and delighted. The very next second, something soft and furry burrowed itself right into her arms. That significantly heavy force caused Qingyu's body to sway slightly, as she subconsciously lowered her head to look. She was immediately met with a large pair of bright azure blue eyes staring right back at her. "Mother, I finally found you." That tiny mushy-sounding voice continued to whine adorably as it skillfully scuttled out of her arms to sit on her shoulder, rubbing its face against Qingyu's neck. "A sticky little fella. Meatball, why are you here?" Qingyu blinked her eyes in surprise, but she was still delighted to see the little fella after so long, and she could not help reaching her hand out to stroke the little creature's tiny head. Meatball snuggled happily into the touch of the young lady's soft hand and said in a soft voice, "I came here with Uncle Little Bay and the rest. It was so hard to locate Mother's scent, and we immediately rushed our way over once I detected it." Qingyu was taken aback. The rest? The next moment, it dawned upon Qingyu what the little beast was talking about. In the distance, a group of people started to appear one after another. It looked like there were probably over 20 of them, with many familiar faces among them. However, the first person her eyes came to see was a handsome striking figure in purple, with a flawless-looking countenance. There was clearly still quite a great distance between them, but her eyes saw him immediately in the very first instant. Coincidentally, the man's gaze slowly turned towards her at that same moment, their eyes meeting each other. "Ayao!" Qingyu's lips could not help but to move slightly. For some reason, maybe it was because the place was really just too cold, her throat felt rather dry, and no sound actually came out. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. But the man seemed to understand what she was saying as his eyes shone brightly with a glint. In the blink of an eye, his body then traversed over an impossibly far distance to come stand right before her. A light swirled within his violet eyes, seemingly surging with the complicated emotions inside him, before he stretched both his arms out to wrap the young lady in an embrace. His low magnetic voice was tinged with an almost imperceptible sliver of tenderness as he said, "Little one, you've really made me search so hard." Qingyu blinked her eyes. For some reason, there was a dull suffocating ache in her heart at that moment. "Do you know how much I've missed you? HM." Lu Junyao let out a soft sigh, his voice seemingly helpless and filled with despair. "The whole time that you were not around, it felt like an entire lifetime has passed, and I am about to go mad." Chapter 321. 1. I missed you. Feeling the man's wide warm chest and that highly familiar aura, Qingyu felt as if a lifetime has passed. They have not seen each other for a really long time. From the time that she was brought here to the mine-free peak, the whole ordeal had taken almost an entire fortnight's time. It felt like the time they spent together was always so short and fleeting. Qingyu reached her arms out slowly around the man's lean muscular waist, and the expression on her face showed a passive and submissive look never seen before on her. Her cheek leaning plainly on his chest like a timid little animal, her voice exceptionally tender. "I missed you very much as well." But after those words came out of her mouth, Lu Junyao's body suddenly stiffened. He slowly released the young lady and lowered his eyes to look suspiciously at that exquisitely beautiful countenance, as he raised a hand to caress her cheek and said, "Did you just say that you missed me?" Qingyu blinked her eyes, puzzled with that question, but still went ahead to nod her head. The very next moment, she saw the look in the man's eyes seem to change, and his fingers caressing her face slowly slid down to her chin. He then lifted her head before pressing his own handsome countenance right smack down onto hers. MMPH. Qingyu's eyes flared wide as she stared, a little caught off guard. The man's ferocious and tyrannical kiss came without any warning, and she was unable to even react, caught in a daze as he laid siege upon her, passively dominated. The tiny beast held in her arms was being suffocated under the man's tight and close embrace. It could not help but to flail and thrash its body all about, which shocked Qingyu back to her senses. It was when she regained her wits about her that she realized where she was at that moment. And if her memory serves her correctly, the white-clothed Lian sure was just right beside her. This fella did not even bother to read the situation, but just went on ahead to grab and kiss her right smack on her lips. Thinking about that, Qingyu could not help but feel highly embarrassed and angry. However, the man did not seem to have any intention of stopping at all. She was immediately so enraged that she clamped her mouth shut and bit the man. Only then did the man come to release her after feeling the pain. Though she was angry, Qingyu naturally could not bear to bite him too hard and hurt the man, but just wanted him to feel the pain. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Seeing the bewildered look that carried a tinge of aggrievement in his eyes, Qingyu shot him an angry glare and said in a low voice, "Can't you see how many people are around? Don't you know to exercise a bit of restraint?" The expression on Lu Junyao's face became even more aggrieved. "You clearly said you missed me. What has missing you got to do with kissing me? Of course there's a link. Didn't you feel how much I missed you from the kiss just now? Qing Yu was speechless. What a load of nonsense. Chapter 321. 2. I miss you. Seeing the dumbfounded and speechless look on the young lady's face, Lu Junyao could not help but to laugh out softly, and stretched his arms out to hug her tightly as he said in a gentle voice, all right, I won't tease you already. I wanted to kiss you, so I just followed my heart and did it. You still have to read the situation first, don't you? Qing Yu murmured softly. Right. I will first find a place where there is no one around before I kiss you next time. You will then have no reason to protest anymore. Lu Junyao then said in a teasing tone. The sound of amused laughter sounded by their ears. It was only then that Lu Junyao seemed to notice the man standing beside them. His eyes gazed appraisingly over the man for a moment, and then seemed to realize something. His gaze turned sharp and he started to say, You are? Why does the aura on this man feel so familiar? His eyes were actually violet just like his own. He would naturally know what that really represents. But he had not thought that they would come to meet at a place like this. The white-clothed Lien Shi curved his lips up and said, To be able to meet a fellow tribesman while I am alive, it is something that makes me happy. Hearing that, Lu Junyao's face darkened slightly as he looked at the man before him, his eyes seemingly a little judgmental. That person was clearly someone he had never met before. So why does he feel so familiar? To the extent he felt that the man might even be kin. Qing Yu saw that Lu Junyao seemed to be feeling rather curious, and she opened her mouth to say, Haven't you ever heard about a mysterious and highly powerful demon seed, who was born in among the demon race 1,000,000 years ago? Lu Junyao was taken aback for a moment, before he nodded his head slightly. What about it? He has heard about that man of legend indeed. This is him. Qing Yu stuck her chin out in the man's direction to point at the white-clothed Lien Shi. Lu Junyao's eyes widened up slightly in disbelief before he turned to look at the man carrying a smile on his face, his mouth slowly coming to ask, You are Lien Shi? The man smiled and nodded. I am. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Ew, I see that you're really famous. Qing Yu exclaimed in surprise. She had merely mentioned just a few words about the man, and Lu Junyao was immediately able to speak the man's name. It would look like the man was really quite an extraordinary character back then. Lu Junyao stared at the man for a while, and his brows then furrowed up. No. Besides your eyes, there isn't the tiniest sliver of the Dark Knight demon race's aura on your body. Are you a remnant soul? Is it really that obvious? The white-clothed Lien Shi shook his head rather helplessly and then continued to say, Indeed, the real demon seed currently should be that person over there instead. As he spoke, the white-clothed Lien Shi pointed his finger out to the side, towards the man who was currently engaged in battle with Yen Pe. Chapter 321. 3. I miss you. Lu Junyao turned his gaze towards the direction the man's finger was pointed into, and saw a face that looked exactly the same as the man directly before him. The white-clothed Lien Shi did not answer Lu Junyao's query, but turned to Qing Yu to say with a smile, Little one, I do not have much time left. We will have to grasp every minute we have for the task that you asked me to help you with. Qing Yu nodded her head and then replied, However, the most important thing we have to do now is to separate those two first, as they are the only ones who know exactly where Mingyu is right now. It was as if the black-clothed Lien Shi had been possessed by the devil, his every strike growing more and more vicious. Yen Pe was slowly finding herself unable to defend against the man's strikes, and had sustained heavy injuries, at that moment barely on her last breaths. If things continued on like this, and no one came to stop her opponent, she might very possibly be killed by the black-clothed Lien Shi. Although he did not understand what the other two were talking about, Lu Junyao had at least understood that the woman who was caught in the heat of battle cannot be allowed to die just yet. He shot his gaze towards a certain direction, and a flash of white shot out speedily. In the next instant, Little Monster was seen holding an almost half-dead woman in his hand, whom he went on to toss nonchalantly onto the ground. Yenpo was at that moment feeling so weak that it seemed like her eyes were seeing things, but she could somehow sense that she was now out of danger. Her hands immediately began to move and weave, looking like she was going to execute some secret technique in an attempt to escape. Her hands were suddenly held down by Qingyu, and the technique she had just begun to execute quickly failed. Yenpa could not help but to clench her jaws tightly together as she glared angrily at the young lady. What are you trying to do? Don't worry. I will not kill you. I just want you to lead us to go see Mingyu. You must surely know where she is. Qingyu said as she looked down at the woman. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yenpa lowered her head and spat on the ground in contempt. Don't even dream of it. I will never betray Sovereign. I know that you are loyal and do not fear death. But you must realize that death is one of the easiest things to face in the world. But living through a life that is worse than death is what's truly terrifying. Qingyu lifted the ends of her mouth up in a mirthless smile. My mother is an elixir cultivator who is able to cure illnesses and save lives, and I have naturally inherited her outstanding talents. However, instead of saving lives, I am more skilled in taking lives, well versed in many different ways to make people suffer a fate worse than death itself. Speaking about that, I would really like to know where you people have my mother imprisoned right now. Yenpa scoffed disdainfully and went on to say, you can give up on that thought then. You will not be able to see your mother again. Chapter 321. For I miss you, what do you mean? Qingyu could not help but knit her brows together. She escaped and stumbled her way into highly deadly grounds within the mine-free peak. It has been 3 days and 3 nights, and you would probably not even be able to find her corpse anymore. Yenpa said in a venomous tone. Qingyu's face turned frosty in an instant, and she whipped her hand out to clutch at the woman's neck. If anything were to happen to my mother, do not think that you will live. Yenpa was not able to breathe under Qingyu's strong grip, her face turning red from suffocation. Seeing that, Lu Junyao quickly pulled Qingyu and held her hand to say, do not worry, as Aunt Lan will be fine. Your father came here as well. He came here ahead of me, and he must have found Aunt Lan by now. Really? Qingyu lifted her head to look at the man, undiminished worry in her eyes. Lu Junyao then said softly in a reassuring voice, trust me on that. Qingyu then lifted her eyes slightly to look at him, seemingly a little more reassured. And the group of people who had been a short distance away were slowly walking over towards them. It was then that Qingyu noticed the people. When her eyes saw a particular white-maned person clad in black clothes, she could not help but call out in surprise. Little Yi, what are you doing here? The last time they met, it had been in the Bright Moon Divine Temple. He had appeared right before her eyes out of the blue, and said some strange things before leaving the place. Reborn into another life, it was probably because they had different identities and in different positions. He was no longer the silent and unknown bodyguard, always hanging around by her side. She had also come to gain a close companion and many other friends, and it could not be helped but to feel that something had quietly changed. Regardless of the fact that there was absolutely nothing they could not share with each other in the past. A person they could leave their backs open to without a thought. But upon seeing him once again now, she felt that the man had now become more and more unfamiliar to her. She had come to this place only because her mother was taken and imprisoned here, and she had no choice but to come here. But for Qingyi Li, why had he appeared here in this place? From the constellation lands in the beginning, and here in the mine-free peak now, it seemed like he was more unfathomable than before, but would just suddenly pop up out of nowhere by her side. Could it really be because of the legendary powers that would make one stronger? As time passes, anything can change. But she did not wish for him to change as well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Change that was brought on by her death. On this man who had crossed over into another world in his relentless pursuit. If even this man can change, then she really doesn't know what else is there in the world that will stay the same forever. Little you, I'm glad to see that you're safe. Qingyi Li had not missed the surge of complicated emotions in her eyes, but he merely showed her a faint smile and feigned ignorance. In actual fact, He had appeared at this place together with Lu Junyao at the same time earlier, but Qing Yu's eyes could only see Lu Junyao at that moment. Even though they had been at such a short distance away from her, her eyes did not see him at all. Chapter 322. 2. I'm back. Why are you not happy? On the other side, after Yanpo was snatched right out from the clutches of the terrifying black-clothed Lian Shi, who was like Azura, the devil from hell, she suddenly seemed to be rather fearful of death now. Against Qing Yu's intimidating threats, she hesitated just for a while before choosing to submit. She knew there was no point for her to continue to resist any further. From the moment the mine-free peak let these people in, it was destined that its fall was imminent. After all, among this group of people, there were some whose cultivation even she herself was unable to fathom, not to mention this incredulously bizarre scene before her eyes, where there were two Lian Shi who looked exactly alike. Hence, she steeled herself as she slowly brought her hand up to a corner of her mouth and bit down hard. A drop of blood immediately beaded on the tip of her finger. That bright red droplet of blood was then smeared onto the lavish blue sapphire stone embedded in the decorative headpiece worn over her forehead. Her mouth started to chant. A blinding light suddenly appeared and started to spread out around her, enveloping everyone there. The next moment, they were all transported into another location. It was seen that they were all in the structure at the highest point that everyone had seen from the bottom before they began their ascent of the mine-free peak. Standing at the top now, it was a totally different view before their eyes. The divine realm was far more desolate and lifeless than any one of them had imagined. The place was broken and in total disarray, in greater ruin than any other place they've passed in the mine-free peak. Looking like the place had been abandoned for many years, cobwebs hanging all around that seemed to have been there for a very long time. Are you toying with us? How can there be anyone here? Someone immediately kicked up a fuss, thinking that this must be a cheap trick from the woman who was trying to buy time for her to escape. However, an incredibly cold and frosty voice then sounded slowly. This is the place. It was the black-clothed Lian Shi. This was a person who had been here for the longest time, and no one knew the real meaning behind the place better than him. As for the white-clothed Lian Shi, after really stepping into the place and seeing the scene before him with his own eyes, the expression on his face seemed slightly taken aback. It was for no other reason. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Then the fact that it was all so familiar to him. Back then, he had disappeared right from this place. It was also the place where war between the gods and demons had begun when negotiations broke down. Everything seemed to have been preserved to look exactly the same. It could be seen from this that someone still remembered the things that happened here very deeply. The white-clothed Lian Shi slowly walked forward, and he raised the sword held in his hand to clear the layers of cobwebs away. The black-clothed Lian Shi narrowed his eyes, like he had been startled by the man's actions. That was because for so many years, even when the place had fallen into ruin and to become completely inhabitable, Mingyu had not allowed any kind of restoration or cleaning at all. Chapter 322. 3. I'm back. Why are you not happy? Even when the cobwebs had grown so thick with layers upon layers, she had stubbornly not allowed any cleaning to be done, as if getting rid of the dust would mean something would be gone and lost, never to come back ever again. But the man was at that moment clearing away the cobwebs in his path, seemingly not paying any mind to the dilapidated mess all around the place, as his footsteps went striding resolutely inside. Everyone then followed closely behind the man inside. After they stepped inside, they then discovered that besides seeming to feel rather bare and sparse, the interior was not as messy and dilapidated. In that expansive and empty hall, a sudden gust of wind came rolling through, causing the white silk tapestries hanging on the walls on both sides to flutter and flap, bringing an ominous and sinister feeling into the air. There was nothing in the enormous hall, except for an enormous black seat up on the podium. Upon the seat, a person was suddenly seen sitting upon it, in a long flowing black gown that reached to the floor, looking like a black mandara flower in full bloom, her long luscious hair reaching her waist, and almost touching the ground with her sitting down. It was only when they went closer to the figure that they discovered the person was a beautiful young woman with extremely exquisite features. Her eyes were closed, her long lashes quiet, and still like butterfly wings that rest over her eyelids. A faint furrow between her brows like she was carrying some irreconcilable sadness and grief on her mind. Her quaint and petite lips were lightly pressed together, tinged with a faint pink like soft flower petals. She held her forehead in her hand, like she had been deep in thought before she unconsciously fell asleep. A clear, pristine aura surrounded her, a young woman so extraordinary that it seemed she must have been a fairy who accidentally fell into this mundane mortal realm, an entity that one could absolutely not bear to profane, feeling like it would be a sin to merely wake her from her peaceful slumber. For a moment, it seemed like no words or any form of rhetoric could come to adequately describe the young woman's perfection. Everyone had not noticed that after they came inside, their footsteps had unconsciously slowed down. All of a sudden, like she had sensed something, the young woman stirred and her eyelashes fluttered softly. The very next second, the pair of mysterious eyes slowly opened. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. The eyes were dispassionate and apathetic, silver irises that did not show any emotion. Just like the glaciers in the mine-free peaks' snowy lands, rock-hard ice that had not melted for many millennia. Those eyes made people pause in their steps. In reality, when the group of people had first appeared here earlier, Mingyu had already sensed them, but never had she ever thought that she would be stunned frozen the very instant she opened her eyes. Right before her eyes was the man clad in robes that were white as snow, his countenance so familiar to her, eyes that carried a hint of a smile as they looked unblinkingly at her. Chapter 322. 4. I'm back. Why are you not happy? At first glance, Mingyu did not feel that anything was amiss. After all, that was a face that she had seen for the past million years, and was one that could not be any more familiar to her. But why did the gaze of those eyes feel like ones that she had seen before somewhere? She could not immediately recall, but she could not help but to find those eyes a little familiar, and yet unfamiliar at the same time. She knew for sure that that was not Liansher's gaze. The very next moment, she then came to spot the man clad in black among the group of people that came in. Two faces exactly the same. Who is that? Is this one of Liansher's pranks? It's been so very long, Mingyu. The genteel white-clothed man's voice suddenly spoke out softly. The gaze upon her seemed to be filled with an endless series of indescribably complicated emotions, deep and immersive, which caused her heart to involuntarily wince violently for an instant. Liansher would never call her by her name. That was because she did not allow him to address her like that. Hence, after countless cold frosty reminders and admonishments from her, he had given in and addressed her respectfully as sovereign like everyone else. But this person before her had called her by her name. Had she been mistaken? Or was it because the person she held in her mind had been gone for too long, so long that she could no longer recognize his face? The white-clothed Liansher saw the stunned and flabbergasted look on her face that remained in a daze for a long while. He then sighed softly to himself, feeling rather helpless and an unspeakable pain in his heart. Have you been well? It's been so many years, but you have not changed in the slightest. You look great. The white-clothed Liansher said softly as he slowly stepped closer towards the woman. Mingyu suddenly shot to her feet from her seat and said sharply, "Stay right there." A slight tremor was actually detected from her voice. She was actually feeling fearful. But the man did not seem to have heard her cry for him to stop, his strides continuing to carry him closer to her. What are you so afraid of? Haven't you always longed for me to come back? Now that I've come back, you are shrinking back away from me. The expression on Mingyu's face froze, and her silver irises seemed to be highly astonished for a moment, contracting in a snap before she said in a soft voice, "What did you just say?" The white-clothed Liansher did not reply to her question, but continued to walk forward till he was right before her, only a small step's distance between them. "I've come back, but you are showing me such a face instead. Is that delight or loathing?" Mingyu's lips quivered slightly as they parted, looking like she wanted to say something, but the words just would not come out. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Her gaze shifted down slowly, and saw the sword held in the man's hand. Lianshur had never used a sword. That person never let his sword leave his side, however. It was said that the sword was the only thing his mother left for him after her passing, and that was why he carried it with him, wherever he went. Mingyu slowly reached her hand out, her actions a little stiff and awkward, like she wanted to touch the person but was hesitant. She wanted to touch what she saw, to know that everything before her was not just an illusion, but it seemed that she could not control her hand all of a sudden, unable to touch the man no matter how hard she tried. Flustered and overwhelmed, tears welled up in her eyes. Chapter 323. 1. I've never loved you. It was not because he was too far to reach, but her hand that reached towards the man's face found nothing but air, passing straight through his body. Her body stiffened, standing rigidly in place, and did not move for a good while, looking as if she could not believe what was happening before her eyes. Lianshur, have you finally come back? Mingyu gazed smittenly at the man, her voice sounding a little delirious as she opened her mouth to say, "But why am I unable to touch and hold you?" Speaking up to that point, her brows creased faintly before she let out a soft laugh, seemingly mocking herself. Just as I expected. It's just another one of my own dreamed-up hallucinations, isn't it? You died a whole eternity ago. But how can you die just like that? Without you, I have nothing at all. You were so very cruel, leaving nothing else behind, but just a few words saying that you love me. Seeing the young woman muttering to herself like she was possessed, Lianshur's eyes flashed with a glint of pain. But after a while, he went on to say in a soft voice, "It was already a mistake that you and I met right from the start. If it was a mistake, why did you tell me that you loved me?" The expression on Mingyu's face turned dark, her voice filling up with grief. The expression on the white-clothed Lianshur's face congealed slightly as he lowered his eyes. That was just to fulfill a dream of yours. Fulfill my dream? Mingyu was highly taken aback. She then let out a low laugh. So, you did that out of pity for me? Because he saw how she was always doggedly chasing behind him in tireless pursuit, so he thought to toss her a sliver of pity right at the end? She will not believe that. If that was truly the case, then why did he save her with absolutely no regard for what it would cost him? There was no need for him to put himself at risk at all. Why is he just not willing to admit that those words that had come out right from his very own mouth? Has he reappeared now just to tell him that her persistent wait over the past million years was all a complete joke after all? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. That cannot be true. She could still remember seeing the longing and regret in his eyes just before he disappeared, and this had come from a man who was averse to lying. He clearly loved her as well. Mingyu shut her eyes tightly, and then opened them again to stare at the man's face as she said, pausing between each and every word, "You are lying." The white-clothed Lianshur's face remained unchanged as the corners of his lips lifted slightly. "You know very well how much I loathe the god's race. Don't you? I will not, and never will I possibly come to love you." Lianshur. Seemingly unable to accept those words coming out from his mouth, Mingyu suddenly cried out to interrupt the man, a sliver of pain coming to taint the cold silver irises. Chapter 323. 2. I've never loved you. She bit down on her lips that were a little white, and her voice carried a hint of weakness as it sounded softly. Can you not treat me like this? Don't you know how long I've waited for you? I've given up everything. You chose this path yourself, and no one forced you to do it. The white-clothed Lianshur's voice was impassive, sounding exceptionally cold and unfeeling, completely disregarding the look of absolute desperation on the young woman's face, who seemed to be on the very verge of crumbling. Watching from the sides, everyone else in the group did not know what was going on in the beginning. It was only at that moment that they started to realize that those two people seemed to have been an ill-fated couple. But what was their real purpose in coming here? Was it just to see the two of them turn on each other, to resolve their personal grievances? And the black-clothed Lianshi, who had stood there without saying a single word, like an invisible person all this time, could not help but to knit up his brows at that moment, when he heard what the white-clothed Lianshi said, seemingly unable to comprehend why the man would do such a thing. Hasn't he come back and was standing there before them? Even if the man was able to deceive everyone else, he would not be able to deceive him. That man truly loves Mingyu, and it was in no way any less than his own feelings for the woman. Otherwise, the man would not have gotten himself killed and his soul dispersed in order to save her. The man will only need to take back the heart here in his body, and he will then be able to be with Mingyu forever, isn't it? So, why would he say such words to her, making him look like he is heartless, and it was all just a great big joke he played on her? How could that man possibly have become a person like that? He clearly cared a lot for Mingyu, and if not for that unexpected incident back then, it was thought that the two of them would have been together long ago, and not come to face such a situation. The black-clothed Lianshi's face turned grim. He then turned his eyes towards Qingyu standing a short distance away from him, and opened his mouth to ask her, "Do you know something about this?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qingyu was slightly taken aback for a moment, before she arched up an eyebrow. "Why would you say that? You were already with him when I saw you guys, and he looked like he trusts you quite a bit. Did he say anything to you?" The man's violet eyes narrowed suspiciously as he questioned the young lady. The corners of Qingyu's mouth curved up. "What is it that you want to know? Why is he saying such things? I do not believe that the past million years could really change and obliterate all that he felt and believed in back then." As the black-clothed Lianshi spoke, his gaze slowly shifted onto the rigid figure of the woman, whose face had turned pale, seemingly in utter disbelief, looking so forlorn and dejected that it caused his hands to clench up unconsciously. Chapter 323. 3. I've never loved you. What right did he have to treat her like that? Does he even know how she had lived her life like an emotionless walking corpse all these years, with just one belief sustaining her throughout, which was to resurrect him? Year after year, she had never once given up. He had known the woman for such a long time, that even he himself could not recall exactly how long it had been. But this was the first time that he had seen her do something with so much determination and resolve, even when it was something that went against heaven's ways. And she would suffer painful tribulations that normal mortals cannot even begin to imagine. For what had she done all that for? Just to let this man rob her of that last sliver of hope she so desperately onto? Rage seemed to fill his heart with no way to vent, slowly eating away his rationality bit by bit. The violet tint in his eyes grew deeper and deeper, and the shade of his face became so dark and gloomy, it almost looked like it was going to drip, until a soft voice floated lightly into his ears, which caused him to forget his rage, as he stood there a little taken aback, and unable to react for a moment. "He does not have much time left," Qingyu told the man softly. What did she mean by not much time left? But before he could even get his query out through his mouth, Qingyu's low voice quickly continued to say, "I found him at the bottom of a lake and accidentally woke him from his slumber. There was a certain mysterious kind of power at the bottom of that lake that sustained his ephemeral spirit body, but now that he has left..." Qingyu did not finish the words after that, but the meaning was already clear with what she said earlier. That man only had an ephemeral spirit body form, and did not possess a solid flesh body. He needed to depend on that strange power at the bottom of the lake to maintain his frail spirit body, and from what she could see, he had been away from there for a very long period. The black-clothed Lianshi's gaze turned unconsciously towards the man, and his gaze grew sharp. She's right. The man's body has indeed become more faint compared to what he had seen in the beginning, and even seemed to be fading away at times. You mean he will continue to fade away and disappear? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. And this time, it was feared the man would truly disappear for good. Qingyu lowered her eyes as she murmured in agreement. For some unknown reason, her mood at that moment had turned inexplicably low and depressed, and she was even feeling a slight twinge of guilt. She had not known it in the beginning, but had just wanted the man to come stop these wrongs from happening. Despite the pressing urgency, she had not missed the look on the man's face back then. It looked like there had been a brief instant of internal struggle and hesitation inside the man, but she had never once thought that things would turn out like this. That the price for it would be having the man disappear away for good. Chapter 323. 4. I've never loved you. It wouldn't help even if I return this heart in me to him? The black-clothed Lianshi then asked in a grave voice. Though the man's return was not a result he wanted. But if the man were to really disappear for good, Mingyu, she would surely lose her mind completely. And he really did not want to see that happen. Just let him shoulder it all. He has already lived on borrowed time for so many years anyway, and accompanied her for such a long time. It is already enough. However, Qingyu's brows knitted up as she shook her head. It's no use. Do you remember that you told me he isn't truly from the demon race, but that half of the blood in his body is from the god's race? What about it? His current spirit body state is formed from the half of his blood from the god's race, and all of his powers from the demon race are contained in the heart that he gave you. So even if you give the heart back to him, not only would it not help him in any way, his ephemeral form might be devoured by the powers of the demonic blood. Is there really no way to change that? The black-clothed Lianshi's face was grim, and no one knew what was going through his mind at that moment. Qingyu paused for a moment, and she was just about to say that she had no solution, as well when Lu Junyao standing just behind her suddenly spoke in an indifferent voice. Unless you are able to find a flesh body that can meld with him perfectly, with the demon race's blood acting as the catalyst, he might just have a chance to survive. Otherwise, only disintegrating into ashes into the wind awaits. The expression on Qingyu's face became slightly startled as she looked at Lu Junyao in surprise, seemingly querying the truthfulness of that statement. Lu Junyao arched an eyebrow and went on to explain. That might really just work, but it requires two very important things, and you cannot do it without either one. But the rate of success isn't great, and it's a solution that carries great risk. What about my body? The black-clothed Lianshi was looking straight at the man as he blurted out quickly. The ends of Lu Junyao's mouth curved up as he cast a measuring gaze upon the man, looking at him from head to toe before he said softly, although your body was originally human, that demonic heart given to you has altered it to become inhuman, turning it completely demonic. Hence, that makes your body no longer suitable for him, who doesn't have a single sliver of demonic aura left in his spirit. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The black-clothed Lianshi slowly lowered his eyes to look down for a moment before he then continued to ask. You mean, what he needs now is an immortal body of the gods? That is one way to put it. Yes. Lu Junyao nodded as he replied. TSK. It is then impossible. The black-clothed Lianshi scoffed, the expression on his face helpless as he looked at Lu Junyao. Throughout the entire Mind-Free Peak, besides Mingyu, no other person here possesses a body of the gods. The war that happened back then had completely wiped out everyone else, from both the gods and demon races. How is it even possible to still find anyone with a body of the gods? And it must be one that can also blend perfectly with his spirit. This is a completely impossible task. Seeing that the man was looking a little frustrated, Lu Junyao curved his lips up and smiled. Why would it be impossible? Am I not a living example that went against all odds, a remnant survivor of the Dark Knight demon race? Chapter 324. 1. Have you thought of going back? Once those words came out of Lu Junyao's mouth, the black-clothed Lianshi was immediately taken aback. It was said that all those who participated in the war have disappeared, or been destroyed over the stream of time in the past 1,000,000 years. But it seemed like this man here was an exception. It was feared that even the man himself, once the mightiest among the Dark Knight demon race, was not aware that a fellow man of his race still existed in the world. Hence, you have a solution, don't you? The black-clothed Lianshi's eyes were fixed on the man, seemingly trying to find the answer he sought from the man's face. Lu Junyao raised an eyebrow and looked at him with a faint an almost imperceptible smile before he opened his mouth to say, "How does any of this concern me?" The black-clothed Lien sure looked a little surprised, like he had not expected the man to react like that. His brows then creased up unconsciously as he said, "Isn't he your fellow tribesman? Are you really going to just watch him disappear into nothing?" "Oh," Lu Junyao laughed softly. "In that case, that man can be considered to be your rival in love. Are you sure you want to save him? I just do not want to see Mingyu suffer so much pain anymore." The black-clothed Lien Shi's eyes darkened as he replied in a soft voice, "You'd better think it over carefully. You both share one heart, and the two of you cannot coexist. With the changes your body has undergone, I believe you must have sensed this. If he is to gain a new life, you will then die." Lu Junyao said emotionlessly, You think I still care whether I live or die? I've lived for so many years that I've long been tired of it." The black-clothed Lien Shi's lips stiffened up at the corners as he scoffed. Just as the two of them were locked in conversation going back and forth, a mirth-filled voice suddenly chirped behind them. "If anything needs to be done, I might just be able to provide some assistance." Turning their eyes around to look, they saw the elegant and good-looking Qing Tianlin, standing right there with a highly disarming smile on his face. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The black-clothed Lien Shi peered a little closer at the man, and immediately discovered that something wasn't right. The look on his face turned into one of surprise and he exclaimed, "In your body, there are two spirit souls." Qing Tianlin's lips curved up, and he nodded his head to admit it readily. "That's right. I took over this person's body, and his original consciousness is almost about to be completely devoured by me. His remaining aura is extremely weak now, and I am impressed that you could actually still see it." Took over. The look on the black-clothed Lien Shi's face immediately became even more astounded. It was not because he was ignorant and was hearing something like that for the first time, but it was because taking over another person's body to gain a new life came with extremely high risks. For a foreign spirit body to successfully take over another living person's body, the spirit body would have to have been someone who possessed heaven-defying powers of cultivation when he was alive, and an expert with extremely strong mental powers, in order for him to take on those risks confidently. Chapter 324. 2. Have you thought of going back? But even though that was the case, if one were to encounter a host with willpower that was too strong and came to lose control of the situation, they would suffer severe backlash, and their spirit souls would sustain heavy damage. But this man here has not only successfully taken over the host's body, but has even devoured the host's soul. That is just unbelievable. That's right. Took over. Qing Tianlin smiled at him again, before his eyes turned to gaze meaningfully at Qing Yu and say, "In the small tiny world that I was in before, my horizons were too shallow and nearsighted. I have discovered now that there is always a mountain that's higher, another heaven beyond the one we see." Qing Yu had naturally noticed the glance Qing Tianlin threw her way, and she could not help but to narrow her eyes. This man had always been unpredictable and unfathomable since he appeared, always acting strangely, and she had absolutely no idea what it was that he said he wanted to tell her. After they've dealt with things here, ever since Lu Junyao knew about the things that happened between Qing Yu and the man, he had developed a sense of hatred for him. The little fox's bright and chirpy personality had changed drastically due to the trauma that man had inflicted on her, turning her into an introverted person who kept others at arm's length, which caused him to not dare to show his affections too clearly even though he had liked her right from the start, treading so carefully around her, as he was afraid that she would back away from him if she found out. But fortunately, she still opened her heart to him in the end. Despite that, he would definitely not spare the culprit who hurt her so easily. With that thought in mind, Lu Junyao could not help but to smile mockingly with a dark scathing glint in his eyes as he said, "When did despicable and unscrupulous puppeteers start to become so big-hearted that they would offer to help others so readily? That is quite a terrifying thought, isn't it?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Hearing that, Qing Tianlin did not show any anger, but instead said with a soft laugh, that is an entirely separate matter. Although puppeteers are generally not well perceived by people, there are certain tasks that specifically require the expertise of a puppeteer to complete. Wouldn't you agree? After hearing the exchange between the two men, the black-clothed Lien sure gained a better understanding and then nodded in realization. So you are a puppeteer. No wonder you are able to take over another person's body to live a new life so easily. But what the man said is not wrong. Although puppeteers are usually avoided by people, as they are a manifestation of evil itself, they possess powers in certain areas that others cannot possibly gain. In their eyes, there was no right or wrong, good or evil, nor whether a task was too difficult or not. To them, it was only whether it could be done or not. And once they have set their minds on doing a task, they would never give up till their objective was achieved. Hence, people in the world call the puppeteers lunatics. Chapter 324. 3. Have you thought of going back? But what cannot be denied was that these men possessed astounding powers. Thinking about that, the black-clothed Lien sure turned to Lu Junyao and said, "In that case, I hope that you can help him. With help from a puppeteer, I believe the chances of success will be greatly increased." Lu Junyao's face turned dark, but a soft gentle palm then grasped the back of his hand all of a sudden. Qing Yu's soothing voice sounded to say to him, "Ah Yao, don't force yourself." Lu Junyao looked taken aback, seemingly rather surprised. "Don't you wish for me to help him?" Although he might not know as much as Qing Yu in certain things, he could still sense that the lass felt a sliver of sympathy for the man. When she heard that there might be a way to bring the man back to life, the expression on her face had been one of delight. Seeing that the man was looking a little puzzled, Qing Yu lifted the corners of her lips and said, "I do. But if you come to fall into any harm because of that, I would rather not." Lu Junyao understood what she meant, and his countenance softened as he asked in a low voice, "Are you worrying about me?" Qing Yu nodded her head slightly. "Your safety is paramount." After all, she had not forgotten how delicate and precious this particular person's body was, when the slightest ailment or injury would throw people into a frenzy. Feeling pleased by her words, the man reached out and pinched her cheek as he said, "I know what to do." Upon saying that, he turned his gaze onto the black-clothed Lien sure to say, "As an ancient site left behind by people of God's race, the air in this place is still filled with such a robust celestial aura, even after so many years. It makes me think that there must be some divine creature or artifact held in this place. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World." His words had come suddenly out of nowhere, though the black-clothed Lien sure was a little puzzled and was taken by surprise for a moment. He went on to nod his head lightly as he replied, "That's right. Deep down underground below the Mind-Free Peak, it is rumored that there is a living Buddha palm lotus that is more than 1,000,000 years old. It is said that it has developed a spirit body form, and it possesses its own intellect, its powerful spirit aura protecting these lands. That must be it. A spiritual life form that has survived for 1,000,000 years would have long gained a physical form and would possess mighty spirit powers. Nothing would be more suitable as a physical body to endow his spirit soul onto," Lu Junyao explained. "But no one has the slightest inkling on where that thing is actually located, and more importantly, as it possesses its own consciousness, do you think it will be willing to do anyone's bidding at all?" Lu Junyao then laughed mockingly as he cast his glance towards Qing Tianlin and said, "That is something you do not have to worry about at all. After all, puppeteers are not entirely undeserving of their reputation. They can already manipulate and control a living person so completely. Getting them to control a spirit life form would naturally be an absolute cinch for them." Hearing that, Qing Tianlin could not help but to laugh in response and say, "You're too kind with your praise." Chapter 324. 4. Have you thought of going back? Though his demeanor was highly modest and humble, he seemed to be completely sure and confident of himself. That also showed that he was capable of doing just that. The divine Buddha palm lotus is a holy symbol of light, so all things that were dark and evil would inversely be most sensitive to its presence. The smile on Qing Tianlin's face did not change as his mouth suddenly started to chant silently. Something floated slowly through the air past everyone's eyes, bringing with it an ominously sinister wind. Qing Yu was standing beside Lu Junyao, and she maintained a distance from Qing Tianlin. However, Lu Junyao was still worried that the man might do something disadvantageous to Qing Yu. However, over that distance between him and Qing Yu, Qing Tianlin's gaze was at that moment fixed on the young lady's exquisite countenance, his eyes narrowing as he saw her standing so closely to the tall, slender figure by her side, the pair looking exceptionally compatible. He then suddenly lifted the ends of his lips, the expression on his face feeling a little strange to see. Qing, to think that the day that you really come to fall in love with a man would actually arrive. Qing Yu looked startled for an instant before she instinctively turned her gaze to look up at the man beside her. But there was no reaction from the man at all, looking as if he had not heard anything. She could not help but feel a little puzzled as Qing Tianlin's mirth-filled voice then reached her ears once again to say, "You don't need to look at him. He can't hear me." Qing Yu's brows knitted up, realizing that the man must have employed some special method to carry his voice, and only she was able to hear him. "What are you up to this time?" Her tone was scathing. Qing Tianlin looked at her with an innocent smile and said, "I did not do anything. I just wanted to talk to you, can't I?" "I don't think we have anything to talk about." Qing Tianlin let out a little helpless sigh, and it was quite a while before he spoke up. "It seems like the two of us have never really sat down to talk things through calmly before. Do you still hold a grudge against me?" A corner of Qing Yu's mouth raised up in a sneer. "Aren't you thinking too highly of yourself here? I've long ceased to care about that. The look on your face cannot deceive me. I can still see the hatred in your eyes when you look at me. Am I wrong?" "Huh?" Qing Yu scoffed coldly. "Are you telling me that people who spurn and ridicule another person's sincerity should not be hated?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qing Tianlin let out another sigh, the expression on his face sad and highly depressed. But he still went on to continue. "Let's not talk about that for now. I just want to tell you, what I mentioned to you before is something that will definitely greatly interest you." "I do not want to hear it." Qing Yu had run out of patience, and did not want to run around in rings with the man any longer. She immediately turned her back coldly to him, not wanting to look at the man, and was going to try to sever the link to the man's voice. However, when she heard the man's next statement, her body suddenly stiffened up, as she stood frozen in place, her hands hanging at the sides of her body, then unconsciously clenched up tightly. "There is a mysterious portal here in the Mind-Free Peak that might allow us to return back to our original world." Chapter 325. 1. Unable to choose, don't you want to go back to see grandfather? Qing Tianlin saw her expression change, and it looked as if her heart was wavering. He then quickly went on to continue. "Even though he had been extremely strict with you all that time, he did that only because he saw you as the future head of the family. You must know that he actually loves you very much deep in his heart. Don't you want to go? See how the old man is doing now?" Qing Yu's slender fingers were clenched up so tightly that her knuckles were beginning to turn white. It took her a while before her lips finally moved to speak, her tone sarcastic. "Are you joking with me? Hasn't grandfather already been driven to his grave from rage by you, his grandson who turned out to be worse than a beast?" Qing Tianlin responded with a mocking laugh. "He is still my kin after all. I am not so heartless to have him exterminated. Aren't your hands already stained full with the blood of your kin?" Qing Yu sneered out of the corner of her mouth with an icy cold laugh. "If I didn't kill off those overambitious wolves from the branch families, they will come after my life one fine day. I was merely nipping the problem in the bud, to rid myself of any future trouble." Qing Tianlin then asked in a highly nonchalant tone, as he turned to look at Qing Yu. "What do you think? Do you want to go back? It is said that the portal will only open up for a very specific period, and if we do not make it this time, I fear we will never encounter such a good opportunity anymore." "Since when did you think we are on such good terms?" Qing Yu's face was cold and impassive as she interrupted the man. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, no matter what you just said is true or false, I will never believe a word of it. Moreover, I will never want to go back there together with you. And since I've come here to this place, I believe that all of this has been predestined in some way. Why should I obstinately continue to pursue my past? Qing Yu said those words slowly, her gaze calm as she looked straight at the man. She then continued, I have been here in this world for many years, and to me, all those memories of my past life have become unfamiliar and foreign, seeming so very far away and detached now. This place here is the place that I should be in. That indifferent and highly nonchalant expression that had been on Qing Tianlin's face finally showed a crack. His eyes narrowed as he said to her, Unfamiliar and foreign? That is the place you grew up in, the place that taught you happiness, anger, tears, and joy. All those things should be so deeply etched in your memory. How can all of that possibly feel unfamiliar and foreign to you? The man's face immediately became mildly tinged with anger. For so many years, after having been reborn into another life over an immeasurable period, his entire life spent in pursuit of just this one young lady, whom he saw as the one most suitable for him. Chapter 325. 2. Unable to choose in the beginning, he had indeed set his eyes upon this young lady purely because she was the chosen heir, who would come to hold possession over all of the family's secret treasures. And it was only by becoming her husband, whereby the man who took her chastity on their wedding night would then come to have the right to cultivate and practice those top-grade martial arts and secret techniques recorded in the family's treasures together with her. Hence, he had intentionally tried to get closer to this young lady, who was cold and unyielding on the outside, but actually had an incredibly fragile heart. He showered care and concern she had never felt before upon the young lady, and she came to sincerely treat him akin whom she had come to trust. Things were coming together very well. Gradually, he came to discover that he himself had also changed. Not only did he seek to get his hands on the family's secret treasures, he yearned to win the person over as well. He did not want to see her smile at other men, and did not like to let her out of his sight, seeking to keep her imprisoned by his side. Just as everything was about to fall right in place, despite the young lady's remaining weak and feeble consciousness that was still fighting to constantly resist and plead with him, he was unable to stop himself. Because only when she became fully and completely his to have, would his mind be at ease. However, all his plans were upended by the sudden appearance of the youth, that incredibly big eyesore, who followed the young lady doggedly everywhere. From that day onwards, his relationship with the young lady slowly broke apart. From an obedient little girl who called him elder brother sweetly in the beginning, she began to disregard him completely, becoming cold and emotionless. He had tried to salvage their relationship calmly and peacefully before, saying it was because he cared too much for her, and that was why he wanted to possess her. What was wrong with that? It was only because of that that she had come to hate him for so many years, and now, is she going to abandon all of that beautiful past they shared as well? He will not allow that. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Upon seeing the man's angry demeanor like he had been betrayed, Qing Yu merely curled up the ends of her lips and opened her mouth to say scathingly, What right do you, the very person who created all that mess, have to bring up the past? If time could be turned back, my only wish would be that I have never met you. Upon saying that, she did not want to look at Qing Tianlin's face a moment longer. She immediately went ahead to end their conversation by turning herself around and walking over to go stand beside the man who was speaking with the black-clothed Lian Shi. Seeing Qing Yu come to lean against him, Lu Junyao could not help lifting the edges of his lips as he reached his hand out to hold the young lady's slightly cold fingers, clasping them tightly in his palm, seeming a little clingy. Qing Yu was slightly surprised for an instant before she glanced up at him with a sheepish smile. But in her eyes, it could be seen they were brimming with love and joy. That entire scene could naturally be seen by Qing Tianlin, who was just a distance away, and his gentle and elegant countenance was immediately tinged with darkness, his long dark eyes filling up with unreadable emotions. Chapter 325. 3. Unable to choose, don't want to go back? Most of it has to be because of that man, isn't it? Oh Ching Ching dear, don't you know? The more you care about something, the more I want to destroy it. Matters here on this side look like they were about to come to an end. Meanwhile, in a place that no one knew about, it was not known how long the two people Qing Lanfei and Mo Jingyu had walked over the endless snowy ground. Qing Lanfei's sight had gone from seeing a fuzzy blur in the beginning to become completely blind now, and could do nothing but to follow Mo Jingyu's lead. She knew that things cannot be left to go on like this. Maybe, in just a short period, Mo Jingyu might become just like her, unable to see anything at all. This was after all a common after effect for someone who spent too long a period of time over snowy lands. Mo Jingyu had been holding Qing Lanfei tightly, and had not let go even once. All of a sudden he halted in his footsteps. Qing Lanfei came to a stop as well. As she could not see, she did not know what had happened, and so she opened her mouth to ask puzzledly, "What's wrong? Is the way in front impassable?" Mo Jingyu stared before them, his gaze unwavering. A moment later he then said slowly, "It's not that the way is impassable. It's just that we've already been walking on this route for 2 days at least, but I still can't see it where it ends. And ever since I stepped into this place, I have not seen night descend." Mo Jingyu's hand that held hers tightened slightly. For some unknown reason, even he had begun to become unsure. Will they be able to walk out from this place at all? It didn't matter that much to him, as he would be able to take another 10 days, or even a fortnight of this with not much problems. But Fei Er's eyes. If they were not treated in time, she might. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Mo Jingyu lowered his eyes and looked down, his fingers coming up to gently caress the woman's smooth, tender cheek. His voice was soft and gentle as he started to say, "Fei Er, if we are unable to find our way out, we might come to lose our lives here. Tell me, do you have any regrets?" The look on Qing Lanfei's face was slightly taken aback. She was unable to see the expression on the man's face, and no emotion could be detected from his voice, which sounded flat and monotonous. She had no way of knowing whether it was because of the low temperature that permeated the air around, but the man's hand against her cheek carried a cold, chilly tinge, which might possibly be a reflection of his mood right at that moment. With no hope in sight, his heart cold with despair, Qing Lanfei reached out and gently clasped it over the man's hand holding her cheek, before she squeezed it lightly. "Jingyu, you might even call me selfish, because I wanted to save you back then. I could even give up the lives of the 2 children in my tummy. At that time, I felt as if the sky would fall if I lost you, so I chose to give up everything else, but just wanted you to live." Chapter 325. 4. Unable to choose, Mo Jingyu's face was grave, as he listened quietly. He had always known the immense price that Fei Er had paid for his sake, and that was why he felt that he was given far too little time to be able to adequately make it up to Fei Er, for all the suffering she has endured. Speaking up till that point, Qing Lanfei then laughed softly. "And now, it seems we have been thrown right into having to make another difficult choice that could mean life or death for us. But at this moment, it seems that I do not feel any fear. I think it is because this time, I have you here with me. As for regrets..." Qing Lanfei's eyes suddenly turned red at the rims, looking like she had words that she was finding it extremely hard to say. She fought very hard to force back her tears that were threatening to gush out, her voice struggling to contain her emotions as she said, "Little Yu and little Bei. My 2 children have never once enjoyed how it feels to be loved and doted upon by their parents from the day they were born, but were dumped into the lower realms by me when they were still so very young, left to roam around aimlessly. They, were just barely in their teens then, but were already so mature and resilient. It pains me to no end." Those words immediately caused Mo Jingyu's face to change slightly. He then said in a soft voice, "It's both of us who have not fulfilled our duty as parents. We will definitely get out from here. Jingyu, I cannot bear to leave them." Qing Lanfei's voice cracked slightly. We definitely will." Mo Jingyu replied. He then bent his body slightly. The rest of the way, let me piggyback you. You need to conserve your strength, and must not allow yourself to fall. But Qing Lanfei was hesitant. Just do as I say. Mo Jingyu's tone was firm. Moreover, you're so light. It wouldn't burden me at all carrying you on my back. Hearing that, Qing Lanfei could only give up on resisting any further, and went on to lean herself onto the man's broad back. Stop it. I do not want to hear any more. Mingyu clamped her palms over her ears with an agonized face, every one of the man's hurtful words feeling like they were stabbing into her heart, driving numbing pain into her that engulfed her entire being. If you have never loved me before, why did you save me back then? Why did you give me hope? Her exquisite countenance seemed to fill up with icy viciousness. Clad in a long black dress, her entire person turned to look exceptionally dark and sinister. The white-clothed Lien Shi's face remained gentle as he slowly raised his hand that was holding his sword, its hilt pointed at her. He then opened his mouth to say softly, "Do you feel cheated? Angry? Then, just kill me now. Do you think that I wouldn't dare?" Mingyu asked icily, her hand grasping the sword's hilt to pull it out of its sheath fiercely, and pressing the sword's point right at his throat. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EUI, does that man really want to die? Cloaked in invisibility on one side, all this time to watch everything happening there. The Earth Fire Devil's Vine blinked his eyes in bewilderment. To think that the woman is actually able to pull out his sword. Is she also a dead person? From what I see, he wouldn't have much longer to live even if he doesn't die from this. With his arms crossed before his chest, Zhang Mai looked at him with an upraised eyebrow to say, "Aren't you aware that besides people who are dead, the person who is most important to him can also unsheath his sword?" Most important to him? The little toddler scratched his head. He then nodded his head knowingly with a mischievous smile. So that's the kind of relationship they have. Chapter 326. 1. Never to meet again. As the little toddler boy spoke, he was rubbing his chin with his hand, the look on his face a little vulgar and lascivious. Zhang Mai gave the little toddler an expressionless glance before innocuous, shifting himself further away from the tiny figure, like he found the little fella rather disgusting. Mingyu's hand holding the sword tightened its grip as she stared at the man's uncaring and emotionless face. Her eyes flashed with a dark glint, like she had come to a decision somewhere inside. But at the very next moment, it was not known what she saw that made her suddenly freeze in her spot. The figure of the white-clothed Lien Shi was slowly fading, and the sword pointed right at his neck that could have very well killed him pierced through nothing but air. It looked as if the man's figure had become a faint and illusory shadow, almost like one was looking at him in a dream. Although the man was still smiling at her, that strange phenomenon surprised Mingyu so much she was unable to react. In the man's smile, there seemed to be something she just did not understand. It was making her feel flustered somehow. Looks like it's already too late. Seeing that happen, Lu Junyao's voice suddenly rang out to say, "Does he really want to disappear completely?" The look on the black-clothed Lien Shi's face was similarly surprised, like he just could not believe what he was seeing. It has been so long, but they still have not received any news about the divine Buddha palm lotus. Is it heaven's will that he must perish? Qing Yu's gaze sharpened as she turned her eyes onto Qing Tianlin, her brows tightly furrowed, seemingly doubtful of the man's abilities. Qing Tianlin showed her an indifferent smirk, not looking anxious at all. "I hope that you will not fail to keep the promise you made," Qing Yu said as she glared at the man, gritting her teeth on every single word. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qing Tianlin scoffed and let out a laugh. "Of course. I will never ever deceive you." As his voice trailed off, a black-colored mist suddenly rose up around him, and something then broke out from it, that lunged straight towards his face. Qing Tianlin stretched his hand out in a grab, catching that thing firmly in his grasp. Upon getting a closer look, it was then seen that it was actually a highly vivid and extremely lifelike gold-colored Buddha palm lotus, held in his palm, its size just about the same size as the man's hand. Buddha palm lotuses were mostly white in color, and would come to take on a tinge that slanted more towards silver the older they grew. A gold-colored Buddha palm lotus had probably never been seen before. Though Qingyu had seen a countless number of strange and amazing treasures before, coming to see something so rare and precious, for the first time, made Qingyu unable to help herself, but to steal a couple more glances at it. She had heard that treasures as rare and precious as this would mostly have gained its own consciousness, and are able to take on another form. Hence she really didn't know why it was being so quiet and docile at that moment. Chapter 326. 2. Never to meet again. Qing Tianlin handed the Buddha palm lotus over to Lu Junyao and said, "Time is of the essence. Draw his spirit soul in here quickly as he is fading fast. It will be of no use if he disappears." Lu Junyao's demeanor was impassive, and did not say anything as he took the divine Buddha palm lotus. He then drew a fingertip lightly over his palm, and a shallow gash immediately appeared. A single bright red blood droplet flowed down the man's fair-skinned palm, to drip right onto the center of the divine Buddha palm lotus bloom. Over on this side, Mingyu stared at the man's gradually disappearing figure, and seemed to finally realize something. The sword held in her hand immediately fell to the ground, a loud heavy clatter resounding throughout the hall. It seemed like she had just discovered that everything happening before her was not a self-conceived hallucination, but completely real. But why was this entire scene making her feel so scared and frightened? Lian Shi, what is wrong here? He's come back, isn't it? So he is really still alive and has come back to see her? But why is his body becoming more and more translucent? Is he going to leave her once again? No, that cannot happen. Lian Shi saw how flustered she was, in a state of panic. He then smiled comfortingly and slowly raised a translucent hand that was fast fading away, seemingly wanting to caress her cheek and to wipe away her tears brimming over in her eyes. But just as his hand was barely an inch away from her, the hand suddenly halted, because he knew very well that he wouldn't be able to touch her at all. His lips curved up tenderly at the corners. "Mingyu, after the passing of 1,000,000 years, it is really most fortunate that we are still able to meet each other once again. Will you let go of the past? Let all of that go, and cherish the person by your side. That is what should be most important to you. Not everything that you've missed and lost can be recovered, and not everyone will always be so fortunate. Let go. Huh? How do you expect me to be able to let it all go just like that?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Mingyu laughed mockingly, and then said through tightly clenched jaws, "I have long become a lifeless walking corpse. If I am to lose this last bit of belief I am holding on to, then there is no more meaning in living my life anymore." After saying that, she paused for a moment before seeming to remember something. The expression on her face turned into one of delight as she said a little anxiously, "You do not have to worry. I've found a way to revive you. For so many years, never has there been a more suitable primer than this. It will definitely succeed. Trust me. Do you remember that you're a goddess?" The white-clothed Lian Shi suddenly interrupted her mid-sentence. Mingyu was taken aback, a look of incomprehension on her face. The gods' race. A divine existence of light that stood for all that is holy, abhors and fights evil and darkness. When did you start to become like this? Turned into someone who would not hesitate to head into the deep pits of hell in order to achieve your goals. The white-clothed Lian Shi said as he stared at the woman, his eyes seeming to carry a slight tinge of disappointment. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.